So, if you're not familiar with the show, it's often presents violence against women with a brutality which is almost, hard to watch sometimes, as that scene might have been, but there are many others. And one of the things that is sorry, I'm just clicking around here. I'm going to share my screen again. Um, One of the things that makes this such an important text to look at in terms of cultural studies is the idea of hegemony, and that people in society often kind of acquiesce and allow themselves to get swept up in ideologies that aren't good for them, as that particular moment from the show presented. And I just want to say more general that cultural critics value what they would call resistance. So in other words, if there's a form of domination out there that you can put your finger on, cultural critics are really interested in examples from television where that kind of domination is opposed and resisted by different groups. Now, this can be really interesting to write about, but what's important is that if you write about ideology, you got to be clear at least about what form of power is actually being resisted, okay? So you've got to spell that out for me, please. Another real cool thing about The Handmaid's Tale is how it became a symbol which could be mobilized in the culture. So here is a news item where we can see that during the Kavanaugh confirmation, which was extremely controversial and divisive, women protesters dressed up as the handmaids and tried to make a point about, how conservative and misogynistic some aspects of our culture seem to be. And so it's an interesting point where television symbolism is picked up in the culture at large and used in a very political way as a kind of a resistance, So I love that example. So if you're interested in working with the concept of hegemony, here are some questions from the textbook, chapter 9, which you can use. So for instance, is there hegemony where the subordinates are led to consent to the system that subordinates them? This is what I've been trying to present to you about this concept now. Have the subordinates reverse the power structure, causing the subordinates to become powerful? Well, this is something that is explored in later seasons of Handmaid's Tale. So you might check it out. All right, let's move on. I mentioned that we are looking at two later formulations of ideology. We looked at Gramsci's theory of hegemony. Here we have a theory from Louis Althusser, who was a French theoretician, and we know about them. They're deeply into semiotics and a kind of a semiotic view of society as well. So Althusser also was working in the 1970s, and his idea was of ideology was very influential in critical theory, in cultural studies, and in feminism. We'll see in a second. So Althusser had a very kind of structural notion of ideology that, society is divided into, segments, and each of those, what he would call ISAs, institutions, like he had the family, school, the church, the media, government. So these would all be sources of power, institutions of power, that would, each of them would have their own kind of ideological possibilities embedded within them. So that's a pretty good one, because families are places where a lot of ideological instruction goes on. We do know that people are very influenced by their parents and family. So it's an interesting thing to look into family, family morality, family storytelling as places where you can find ideologies. Althusser also was into thinking about how individuals are actually captured by ideologies. So again, his structural notion of, sort of these ideologies, which are these huge kind of semiotic engines, which are, passing through culture, and people get kind of attached to them. Something he called hailing. And his idea, his example was sort of, you're walking down the street and somebody in authority kind of calls out to you, hey, hey you. And they could have been calling out to anybody, but you turn around like, oh, they're talking to me. It's the cops. They're calling out to me. So his point is, you didn't have to respond to that hailing. You didn't have to respond to the call, but you did, and you've sort of then situated yourself as, oh, I'm the one they're talking to. So that's his notion about ideology and mass media, is kind of like, we're going to spew out, MSNBC leftism, Fox News rightism, various different ideologies on television, and audiences are going to, find themselves and get connected at that particular moment. They're being hailed, and should they take up that position, then they become what he called subject to the ideology. In other words, you recognize yourself as that person who is, in the ideological picture. So, of course, advertising is a great example of this. There's a new barbecue. They show you a party of friends who are cooking out there with beers and, sausages and great stuff. And, you see yourself in there. Yeah. Oh, that's the good life. That's how I want to be, right? Versus somebody who says, man, meat, we kill a lot of animals. That's not a good thing, right? So I don't know. But the idea is that you were hailed by that commercial message. So, that's Althusser's idea of hailing. And this was also very influential in an amazing theory from feminist film critic Laura Mulvey. And I'm going to let the media insider explain this male gaze theory. But it is very much the Althusserian idea that television, or in this case film, sets up a way of viewing, a way of seeing things. And in her theory, it's a way of seeing women. And if you are, kind of hailed by it, if you kind of take your place there and just start watching, then you are, swept up in what she called the male gaze. So check this out.